Are you working it remote with young kids in the house? Oh, I've been there and it is a struggle. Today we're sitting down with a preschool teacher to learn about how to teach your kids independence, boundaries, and how to be quiet. This is Work It Remote, a community for women working remotely. I'm your host, Erica Bergen, and on this podcast, we get real about remote work and how to make it work for you. Enjoy the episode. So today I am so excited to sit down and talk with Brittany Smith. Brittany is an early childhood educator, and she's been working with kids in the pre-K and second grade kind of age ranges for several years now. Brittany and I know each other personally. I have found that Brittany just is a real natural around kids. And so I thought it would be great to just talk through how she does some things in her classroom, because I'm always amazed that teachers can accomplish so much with so many kids, and I struggle to do just the basics with my two. So that's what we're going to get into today, and welcome, Brittany.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here and excited to have this conversation.
How would you coach a parent on how to empower their kids to do independent play? And what would be a good activity to get a child into the mode of being able to even have independent play?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about 3-4-year-olds now.
So just to go off of my classroom setting and what it looks like. So obviously I would have my desk. There are a variety of centers where the students are able to choose from. So for example, we have our louder centers, such as music, obviously very noisy. Block center, which typically students can engage with very extremely independently, but can also be a little bit noisy. We have a dramatic play, which is basically like a dress-up center. They can have a kitchen, play house, things like that in that center. Also can be a little bit noisy. Then we have centers that are a bit more quiet, but they still can play independently, such as Toys and Puzzles, which is exactly as it sounds. We have an art center, and then we'll have our library center. There's also a space for privacy, which is essentially a calming corner. So there's a lot of variety in the classroom for them to choose from. Now, when it comes to teaching them how to interact and engage in those centers, typically it's and I do, we do, you do scenario. There's a lot of scaffolding involved in it where I will play, or I'll ask if I can play with them, essentially. And so once I'm invited into their space, we'll play together. I'll model ways for them to interact with the different toys or activities they have available to them. I'll model it for them, and we'll do that continuously, routinely over time, to the point where, okay, now we can do this together. Now you can do this independently. Maybe you can teach a friend how to do this. Now you two are doing it together. And then I can essentially remove myself from the picture. Like the goal is almost, by the end of the year, we want them to be able to play and function in the room together as if I wasn't even there. Now, obviously I am there, and I'm going to always engage with the children when I can, and with as many students as I can. But when they're able to function and just play as if I wasn't even in the room, we feel like we really have accomplished something, especially at the preschool age.
Yeah, I'm thinking here because you can probably see my face, and my face is like in deep thought right now, because I'm thinking, preschool, that you're in New Jersey. New Jersey's fortunate because preschool is part of the public education system, but in most states, that's not the case.
Right.
And so at that age, you're home or you're in a daycare setting, right? I think there are some wonderful daycare and preschools out there. But if for those parents who have their child at home with a caretaker at home, right, that's not necessarily a skill that I've heard of being intentionally developed in that way, right? So I think that's kind of one of my takeaways there, is that you can set your kid up to be a little more independent during that overlap period when you're home and they're home. And that starts with first getting the activity that they can do on their own, starting to play with them with it, and then gradually removing yourself from the play so that they feel confident and comfortable and safe to do that on their own.
Exactly. It's knowing your child's interest introducing them to things that might spark more interest and curiosity and that they can explore with over a longer period of time. Yeah, teaching them how to use those materials. And then eventually, like you said, gradually over time, they're able to explore and play without you hovering or without you needing to play with them. And that's one of the great things too about teaching, children boundaries, whether it's how to interact or how to engage with certain activities or where they can or can't go within a space, is that having these different boundaries helps encourage self-regulation. It helps encourage independence because they have to learn how to do things somewhat independently. They know they're always going to have a caretaker ultimately at the end of the day that they can go to if they need, of course. But there's moments where it's less urgent and we would love for them, or we want for them to be able to learn how to do things on their own, essentially, if someone is unavailable and not there for their immediate attention. It's also, I think, nice for students, for children, to not always have immediate gratification. I think that's also a very important skill that
Yeah.
have to be taught.
Yeah. And what is the, like, realistically, how much independent play can you expect reasonably from a child of that age?
So if we're talking I will say for 3-year-olds, our center times in the preschool classroom are 60 minutes. So students get 1 hour of free play. They essentially can go to the center of their choosing for however long they'd like, whenever they'd like, essentially. The only rules there are rules, of course, right? How they engage with the materials, cleaning up after themselves. And which is a whole nother process, model how many students can be in a center at a time. And so as long as another student, or they're not over the max number of students in that center, if they want to go from center to center to center to center within a 60 block period, they're essentially able to do so. So they can pretty much do that for that solid hour block of time. Ideally, then, what we'll notice is that over time, and as they age and they get closer to 4 years old and the 4-year-olds get closer to kindergarten age, is that their ability to sustain attention or keep their attention at one center will progress and expand over time. So for the 3-year-olds, one center, even though it's very engaging and fun and has a variety of activities, they might want to only play with it for 10 minutes and then they're bored, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they come to me. It just means that they go to the next center that has their interests, that's available to them. So then they'll go there for maybe 5 minutes, and then they'll go to another one for 10, 15 minutes. They're able to do that for an hour. The 4-year-olds closer to 5-year-old age, they can withhold their attention in a center for the solid hour if we let them. 30 minutes even, particularly block center, dramatic play, things that are a little bit noisier do tend to hold their attention a lot longer. But it varies by child. It just really depends on their interests, but it's possible for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think sometimes we can, when we're in those crunch modes where we just need to get work done, and we've got a child at home, and maybe, I mean, you want the child to be safe. So if you're not able to watch the child, you don't want them freely roaming, right? But but if there's a caretaker there, I think, I've fallen into this where it's, just go outside so I can have some quiet. Or you turn the TV on, and I always feel guilty about that option, especially when I feel like I've abused it, right? Where there's just too much in a day or too much over the course of a period of time. So what I like about this is it gives you something like a benchmark of how to think about it and how to maybe help whoever's helping you with your kids to start to think about this, because what happens is, like, maybe at 3, they only are able to spend 30 minutes. But if you continue to practice a discipline of supporting your child in independent play, then if you're in the long game of working remote, then by the time your kid is 6, 7, 8, you're going to have a kid that's much more self-sufficient, and you're not going to be like, whatever time you put in early will
Payoff.
will probably pay off, right,
Absolutely.
in the long run, because
Absolutely.
you've got, for lots of reasons, independent play is good,
Hmm.
but especially when you really need your child to respect your boundaries and your work time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. It's definitely worth the initial effort. That initial process is not the easiest thing. It definitely takes a lot of repetition, a lot of modeling. Children, especially at a young age, they are typically most successful when they have established routines that they can do over and over and over again. There's a safety to it. And it also just helps with them remembering and knowing what's going to come next, right? There's a safety in that, and knowing what the expectations are, and knowing where certain things are within a room. All those little details matter to a 3-year old, even though they might not know how to express it or voice it. It definitely helps pay off in their ability to work and play independently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. So, all right. So, what can you do? Because there are just those manic moments, right? Those times where you just need your kid to just know that it's quiet time. It's quiet. Like what? like I don't care what you're doing, just do it
Right.
quietly. We talked before about, that there's like some tools that you use in the classroom to help kids understand like their tone of voice, or
Mhm.
like come in the room or don't. So what are some of those things that you found, just little tricks or tools that you've used to kind of get things going?
Right. So, I mean, for us, when it comes to setting boundaries with students and establishing those sort of expectations, our number one thing is always setting up and establishing the routine, like I mentioned. After that, it's really the physical space, right? They learn where, again, like I had mentioned before, where certain things are within a classroom setting. They know where my workspace is versus their workspace is. But part of having a physical boundary and creating a space for them is, like I mentioned, having things accessible to them where they can feel like this is their space to play, to feel special, where they have different activities and games of interest to them that they can easily access. And then there's also things like using visual cues. So different visual cues might include, like you had mentioned, a stop or go sign, a red light, green light, even like little signs or voice level charts. Like all of those are things that we utilize within a classroom setting. So for example, a voice level chart, that's something that you could make on a Word document, on PowerPoint. Voice level 0 would be silence. 1 would be a whisper. 2 would be just normal talking voice. 3 might be loud or a loud and proud voice. 4 might be outside. It's really up to you to determine how the levels vary.
What's that called? A level? What was the name of that?
I mean, teachers probably call it all different things. I would call it like a voice level chart,
Okay.
and it's a way for us to kind of set the tone and establish what the expectation is. But it's also a way for children to self regulate, right? They might need reminders like, hey, like, what's your voice level at right now? And they're usually able to say, like, it's probably at a 3 or it's probably at a 4. And then, might say, like, okay, well, look, and we'll use what are those clothesline pins? And we'll put them at whatever we want their voice level to be. And, that is a visual reminder, right? They can physically see what their voice level should be at that moment in time. And then we can kind of
Mm.
help with self checks like, are you at a 1 right now? Are you at a 0? Where do you think you are? Um, so practicing that throughout the day, making it a fun like game out of it, right? Where when we introduce it, we'll move the clothespin, like, let's talk at this level. And they get a kick out of the whispering part. And then they obviously get a kick out of the yelling and screaming part. But we talk about where it's most appropriate to use those voice levels and when. So something like that is helpful. A red light, green light system is helpful. They sell like digital ones on Amazon. You can make one yourself, like a stop sign and a go sign with like Velcro dots. And basically, green means that you're available. They can come in if you want them to or if they'd like to. And a red would mean that they can't come in right now. You're busy or you're unavailable. And that means that they just have to wait. So things like that are always very useful. And those are part of our physical spaces that help establish the routines, the expectations that go on within the classroom setting.
So I like both of those ideas.
Mhm.
So the first one is the sound chart. And I like that because you can introduce this chart into your house. We did this with my oldest when we were trying to establish the bedtime routine.
Okay.
So it sounds similar. Like when we brought in something and it had like magnets, and she helped put it together. So we talked through, what do you do? What do you do first? And what do you do second? And what do you do? And she helped put the magnets in the sequential order.
Uh-huh.
And then we referred back to that
Right.
every time. And then there was a reward system built into that. So it seems similar to me. I don't know if you would you encourage a reward system on something like the sound?
Initially, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then eventually it becomes the expectation. So, yeah.
How would you build in the reward into that?
So initially, there would be a lot of just whole group, or with all the students rather, celebration, right? So we're all cheering, we're shouting, we're maybe getting stickers like high fives, air fives, pats on the back, kissing our brains, things like that, just to kind of acknowledge that we're doing the right thing, we're making the right choice. It really depends also on knowing your child, right? What is something that would interest them and that would be extrinsically rewarding, because you can do extrinsic rewards or you can do intrinsic rewards. I typically prefer intrinsic rewards, but I'll start off with things like stickers, bubbles, and then eventually I'll taper off from that and it'll be more intrinsic, like you did such a
Great
great
job.
job, but not just like, we call them like empty praises, right? Where you just like, good job. But instead of saying good job, we'll be like, you did such a good job staying quiet when you saw that the voice level chart was at a 1, right? Being very specific and explicit with the way that we congratulate them or tell them that they're doing an amazing job. We're very specific with what it is specifically they're doing. So that way in the future, hopefully they'll repeat it again and again and again.
Yeah. So would you suggest that same approach where you're sitting down with the child, you're making a family meeting, right? And in some sort of fun way, and you're talking about what one is, and then you
Yeah,
talk, what you discuss is, okay, so where would we use a one?
exactly.
And where would we use a two? And then maybe practice it over the weekend, practice it for a couple of
Mhm.
weeks, and then just pray that it
Exactly.
pray that it works for that
Exactly.
important
And
meeting
it's really
happens.
about like repetition, right? You have to be consistent. It's really always going to be about consistency, because if you're not consistent, they're not going to care and they're definitely not going to take it seriously. But I 100% agree that like you have to take the time to introduce these things to them. And exactly like you said, at level 1, like maybe ideally you would include a picture with it, right? So like, what picture do you notice? What are they doing in the picture? Oh, they're whispering. Can you show me, what does whispering look like? And then you can practice whispering. And like, where would it be good to whisper? Should we whisper when we're on the playground? Why or why not? Right? What do you think? Should we whisper when you're reading a book? Why or why not? And these might be incidences where you might want to role play, right? So if they're trying to read a book, if they can't read, they can't read, but they're reading a book, they're trying to look at something, or you're reading a book and someone's making a lot of noise, you over exaggerate, but you can't pay attention, you can't figure out what's going on, you can't read your book because someone is so noisy, they're so disruptive and distracting you. So it's really just being over the top, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of engage with them, to keep them entertained, but also so that they understand why, not just the what you're expecting them to do, but the why behind it, so that they can kind of hopefully correlate that with other times of the day or other things that are going on within the house. That it'll make sense to them, like, oh, okay, well, mom, dad, they're working right now, so that's why I have to be at a 1, because if not, mom can't hear what's going on, or mom can't focus at that moment, so it's best for me to stay at this level at this time.
And just to follow that through, my instinct would be, if you've asked your child, or someone has, whoever's,
Mhm.
they're in the house, you're asking them to, be at a level 2
Mhm.
for a period of time. When you get off that call, are you celebrating and then like go into a level 5 for a little bit
Yeah,
and doing a little
yeah,
dance party or
absolutely.
something, and
Yeah,
just letting them kind of shift? You're not asking them to
exactly.
stay in the same gear
Right.
for too long,
Right.
right?
Exactly. That's a great idea. Yep, absolutely. So I would do exactly that. Like, wow, you did such an amazing job. Thank you so much for staying at a level 2. Like, you're so great. And then let's celebrate. Let's go to a level 4. Let's go to a level 5. Let's go outside. Let's go outside. Let's
Yeah.
scream. Let's, and let them have their moments, get all that energy, that stagnant energy that they might have out. And then again, eventually they'll become very used to that sort of expectation, so it won't be as necessary. But it's always great to celebrate your child and what they're able to accomplish, and when they're listening and helping you succeed as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I love that idea. So let's go to go, no go, the red, green.
Mhm.
How would you explain that to a 4-year-old?
So So we typically use like a stop go system for the bathroom because we have a bathroom within the classroom and the children have to figure out like when they can go in, when they can't go in because they eventually learn that they're also not allowed to lock the door, right? They can't lock the door. And so what we'll do is we'll introduce the game of red light, green light, which surprisingly enough, I mean, most students are actually pretty familiar with that, but even if they aren't, we play it with them. So whether it's playing outside with actual.
And that's like the childhood game we all
Yes,
know and grew up
yes.
with, right?
Yeah,
Where you're
red means
standing and
stop,
then you
green means stop.
run and then you
Exactly.
stop.
Who can
Okay.
make it to the finish line first. They love that game. They love that game. It's fun. So like in the classroom setting, we actually do have that we take outside with us, those big signs like red, and it looks like a stop sign. So we use those to play the game. So the kids really get engaged with it. They can see it clearly. We explain it, they play, they love it. And even if they don't fully understand initially, typically from scaffolding and from seeing their friends, their peers do it, they're able to catch on very quickly. So now it's like, okay, now we know what red light means. Now we know what green light means. Also, if they've been in a car, they might have noticed or observed the same thing, right? When you're driving, it's the same rules, the same scenario. So then you'll introduce it into the classroom setting, like, okay, well, I have this red light or I have this stop sign. What do we know that this means? Oh, it means stop. So if I have this up, what does that mean to you? Or what does that mean to all of us? And then someone will say, oh, it means, we can't go, or it means stop, no going, and things like that. And so, again, through repetition, what you'll do is you'll just switch it out. Or if you have a button, one's red, one's green, press the button. If it's green, that means you are more than welcome to go in. Don't have to worry about it. No concerns on that end. Versus if it's red, that means that they have to wait until the bathroom's available or until, in this instance, until you're available to work with them. And this is, again, just through repetition and setting clear expectations and rules with how that's used. And it takes practice. It takes practice, but they do get used to it ideally eventually.
The school year starts in what, September?
Mhm.
So red light, green light. How long are you seeing it to take most kids to pick up on that?
So it can take, it'll depend. It varies by child, but it can take anywhere from like 1 month for them to really understand it, to 3 months for some students. What really it ends up being is they just need the reminder of like, don't forget to look, don't forget to look. So if it's in an obvious place, an obvious setting where they can't help but see it, that typically is helpful, obviously. Also, for them to realize that in certain settings, it's not necessarily the game where they get to just press it and decide when it's going to be a green light versus when it's going to be a red light. And so that's more of establishing the rules of, okay, this is for me, this is for my room. And, when I'm using it, this is what that means for us. It's just having those conversations and just reestablishing again and again as long as you need to. But ideally a month of very consistent practice.
Yeah, so I'm even thinking, right, you're putting it in a couple different places
Mhm.
to start out. I mean, I love a shower on my own, which doesn't happen all the
Right,
time, right?
right.
So
I'm
like the
sure. I'm
bathroom
sure.
would be great to use that. So using it for the bathroom,
Mhm.
using it for the office.
Right, exactly.
And there are also some doors in our house that lead to the outside,
Right,
so those doors are obviously locked,
right.
but there are times when they're unlocked
Mhm.
and kind of propped open, and
Yeah,
that might be another
yeah.
opportunity to do the red light, green light. So I could see how, if this is something that's important to you, right, it is a little bit of an investment in time.
Mhm.
But when you think about it, a month, 2 months
Right.
to have more order and structure around when your child can enter your office, that's
Right,
huge.
exactly.
So that month, it sounds like I'm hearing, I'm like, oh my gosh, a month.
Mhm.
But I'm also thinking, how long did it take to potty train?
Yeah,
How long does
yeah.
it, right? These things do take time. And you're teaching your kid a life skill
Mhm.
of learning boundaries and learning rules and expectations.
Exactly.
And two, you're giving yourself the gift of a little bit of space and breathing room,
Mhm.
right? And also, you can now apply the same, once they get it, you can apply red light, green light or the voice measure in so many other
Right.
different scenarios that you might be in with
Right.
your kid over time.
Exactly. And then it's pretty much like, as long as if there's another adult to supervise, obviously that's great. But in the instances that it's not, like if they have other activities or things that are able to keep them busy, whether it's red light, green light, or just like the voice level chart, right? If they have other activities that are interesting to them and they have maybe their own special designated space, just like you have your own, excuse me, designated space, that also helps make the process go a lot more smoothly. So they're not like sitting there. Obviously, we don't want them twiddling their thumbs bored. We do want them to have things to do that keep them occupied and keep them entertained. That doesn't necessarily have to be media related, like TV, iPad related, right? So giving them other activities to do that are of interest to your specific child would be the most ideal scenario. And then, like we mentioned, positive reinforcement. So celebrations, thanking, congratulating, all the great jobs with very specific statements of what it is they're doing correctly. And maybe there's things like token board systems that we use with some of our students, depending. And like a token board is, okay, well, if you do this thing, whatever that thing is, if you do this one thing for us 5 times today or 5 times the next 2 days, 5 times this week, then by the end of the week or by the end of the day, you get to have this reward. And it can be a reward of their choosing, right? You give them some options. These are your options. What reward do you want? That also can be another extrinsic motivation for them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we for a little while we had a treasure box. You
Yeah.
reminded me of that, and I haven't done that in a while, but it really was a good motivator.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was, if you stay in your seat at dinner
Exactly.
for this meal, at the end you get to pick something
Right.
from the treasure box.
Right, right, which is an exciting thing. And then the thing is, so like with the token boards is like, okay, we might start off at 5, right? If you get 5 tokens within the day, then by the end of the day, you get to do this fun thing that you love. And then over time, if once they start getting those 5 coins every day, like every time, no issues, then you just extend it. Okay, well now it's 10, or now it's 7, now it's 8, now it's 10.
Hmm.
And then you're increasing the expectations and they're growing with that.
I think so often when there's so much tenseness around and stress around the working remote with kids and
Right.
trying to juggle it. What I'm hearing is also that that's also an opportunity to connect with your kid,
Mhm.
right? And to build some life skills with your kid. And then also just be playful and creative, like going out in the yard and playing red light, green light, and then having fun conversations about levels of noise and
Right.
screaming and then whispering. Like these are all fun things that we can be doing with our kid while we're also teaching them
Right.
something really valuable.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's in this ideal scenario, you're getting done what you need to get done, which therefore allows for you to have more family time with them. And that's part of creating schedules and routines for children, right? So our kids, we have visual schedules. That's another part of our like physical space, right? They have a visual schedule where they see exactly what time of the day it is. So they'll have like the arrival sticker, not sticker, but the arrival cutout. There's a picture that goes with it. Then it's breakfast, and it's with a picture that obviously matches. And it goes like that throughout the entire day until they leave. We have like an arrow or a star or whatever to show where they are for that time of the day. So every day they know what our schedule looks like. For students that struggle with it, we might individually take them up like, okay, this is where we are now, this is where we're going next, and this is maybe the one thing that's after that, to kind of get them used to looking at the schedule and knowing what the expectations are and what to expect for themselves, which also creates
Mm.
a sense of safety for them. But yeah, so having that schedule also can show them like, okay, well, after I have this meeting, what do we do next? And they'll look and they'll say, oh, they'll see a picture of maybe a reward or maybe outside or maybe playtime, like something special to them. So they know that they have things to look forward to throughout the day, but they also realize like, okay, well, I have to get through this first, this maybe not as
Right.
fun time, or maybe it can be fun. It doesn't have to be not fun for them, but I have to get through this meeting time for mom first, and then I get to do
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I've struggled with after school routines a lot.
Mhm.
So this is speaking to me, but it's this idea of creating the schedule after school so that it's like, all right,
Uh-huh.
you're going to have a snack, then you're going to have some playtime.
Mhm.
You know, mommy's working, red light is on,
Right, this is
you
your
know, voice
playtime.
one is on, right? And then at 5 o'clock or whatever it is, whatever time
Right,
that ends, then we're going to go outside, you know, and kick the ball around for
exactly.
15 minutes, and then you're going to help me make dinner, and then whatever. And it also, I think, is very grounding, not just for the kid but for the parent, because I know that I have felt like when once my kid gets home, it starts to just swirl.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, wait, I'm
Right.
trying to rush here, I feel guilty because I'm not paying attention to them,
Mhm.
and then I'm feeling guilty because I'm not really listening to this meeting.
Yeah.
So it would ground me to know, okay, I have permission to do this, my kid's okay, they have something to do right
Right.
now, they're not missing me, and then I can disconnect at 5 because I've have another equally as important commitment, which
Right.
is
Right.
right, spending time with my child.
Exactly. Exactly. And so creating that visual schedule where they can see and, we'll have the label, right? The word of what it is that they're doing during that time, but also the pictures that match so that they can read it themselves. And then just a little, like I said, a little sticker, a little arrow that just kind of indicates where in the day that they are. And so that again creates just a sense of safety and helps ideally relieve any anxiety they might feel about, well, what am I doing next and what's happening and where is everyone? So obviously you don't want for when you're in meetings or when you're working to be a boring time for them. So like you said, that could be their playtime. And playtime is a fun thing, right? That's something for them to look forward to. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really just about how you introduce it and if they're aware of how to do it independently, which goes back to the modeling and the repetition, then it can be a smooth experience. It just takes practice.
So give us some language, because in those times where your kid, right, fill in the blank, your kid walked in during a red light, your kid, you know, was a 5 when the clothespin is on a 2,
Mhm.
or is just having a tough day and is throwing a total tantrum,
Right.
right outside your door or maybe on your lap. In those moments, I fumble with how to
Yeah.
approach it with right compassion.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, what do you do in the
I
classroom?
mean, so it's inevitable that a child is going to interrupt at some point in time, right? They're not always, but it's going to have to happen. But it's important to just use those examples or when that happens as teachable moments for them, right? So it just re-explaining why after it happens, ideally immediately after it happens, but at some point after it happens, reminding them of like why it's important to respect boundaries, what boundaries mean, and discussing what they could do differently or maybe coming up with an idea of how it can be handled more differently. We'll go with the example of they're being too loud, right? They're being too loud. It's extremely disruptive. You're unable to really focus on the meeting or the work that you're doing. If you're able to address it right then and there, that is the most ideal scenario because if you address it 20 minutes from when it happened, it's not relevant to them anymore. Ideally, if you can address it right then and there, that's great. Obviously, if you're working, that might not be the best case scenario. You might go up to your child, eye level, saying, I'm noticing that we're not really at a level, whatever the voice level chart says. We're not really at a 1 right now. Do you feel like you're at a 1? And it can be ideally open ended questions, but you can also lead in with a yes or no, right? Do you feel like right now you're at a level 1, a whisper? And this is what a whisper should sound like, and reminding them. And ideally your child's going to be like, no. Or if they say, yeah, I was, like, are you sure? Like, I don't know if that's true, right? And then ideally they'll acknowledge, okay, no, I wasn't. Okay, where do you think you were on the level chart? And then they'll say maybe they were at a 3. And then it's again having that conversation that was initially had in the beginning. Well, why is it important for us to be at a 1 when we see that the voice level chart is at a 1? Right. And going over those same ideas of if I'm reading a book or if I'm in the library or if you're reading a book or if you're doing something that requires you to be quiet, what would happen if I'm being noisy? How would that feel? Right. How would that make you feel? How do you think that makes me feel when you say you're going to be at a 1 or we agree that you're going to be a 1 and you don't do this? And then you're kind of getting into the empathizing and teaching emotions and you're again teaching self-regulation, but it just takes a lot of repetition and practice. So you want them to be able to realize like, ooh, I probably could have done a little bit better and acknowledging what could be done differently, right? So okay, so next time when we see this is at a 1, what should we do different, right? What can we do next time?
Mhm.
Like, okay, thank you, love you, like let's promise we're gonna have a better time next time, or we'll get it right. We're just gonna keep practicing. Mistakes happen, right? It's reminding them that you're not expecting perfection. They're going to make mistakes, but it is about reminding them of the expectations that you have for them and that they've agreed to. So I would say just really acknowledging what you noticed, asking if they agree. Do they notice it too? What was the agreement? What do the rules say? Or what are they supposed to be
Mhm.
doing during this time? And if they were following that, and if not, or what can we do differently so that you remember to follow the rules? And maybe like, why weren't you following the rules this time? What happened? Like maybe something happened that really got them riled up and excited. So there's also that bit of like being understanding, being patient, and just open communication, and your child feeling safe enough to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, and sometimes they just, right, they just want a hug. So you go, you
Exactly.
address that, you give them a little attention, you give them a big
Hmm.
hug, and then they can kind of go about the rest of their day. One thing, and this is just something that I've started to use as a technique along the way, is if I have control of my calendar, which oftentimes I do, right, is that I won't schedule the most important meetings when those overlap times are, to take pressure off of myself. And
Yeah.
to your point, if something were to happen, to be able to address it. So that's one tip that I've learned, is to just blocking out my calendar, even though I'm not technically right busy, and then I can be selective in what I accept during that
Yeah.
time. And look, there are some people you can speak to and they're going to get it, and it's not a big deal if you take a minute to manage something
Yeah.
happening at home. But you know those people you can do that with, and you know those people that you can't.
Yeah.
And so that also takes a little bit of the pressure off.
It's also a reminder to parents too, like, you can't don't be too hard on yourself, right? It's if you're parenting and you're working and you're doing both things like simultaneously, essentially, it's a juggling act that's very difficult, and children are always going to be children at the end of the day. It's just kind of understanding that things aren't always going to go as planned, but as long as you're remaining consistent with what you're teaching them or attempting to teach them, I think that's what's going to be most important and most effective in these scenarios. Is just you just got to keep being consistent with it.
Well, thank you so much, Brittany. You've shared so many wonderful nuggets and tips and tools. Really appreciate the insight here. Hopefully, you all listening got something out of this. And I'm always so impressed with teachers and
Yeah.
how they're able to manage a classroom. So, you've given us a bit of a preview into that. And hopefully, we can all use some of that to manage our lives a little bit better. Thank you,
You're
Brittany.
welcome. Thanks for having me.